Good. Super. Excellent. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to Gina for chairing and to Toby and Tim for those great discussions. I'm actually very interested in both of those. And I would say my topic fits a little bit closer with what Toby was talking about. But I think, yeah, I think I'm really interested in thinking about all these ideas together. So, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about grading or not grading. And if you've spent time around professors, or if you are a professor, then you probably have the experience of hearing professors complain about grading. So this is from Twitter. This is Playmobil adjunct professor. Uh, they say, me to my mom, want me to pick up some dinner. Mom, oh, I thought you had a lot to do today. Are you done with all of your grading? And the response is, I will never be done with my grading. And so, I think this is a feeling that most of us have expressed at some point. Um, and then there are other ways to think about grading and critiques of grading. So this is from Jesse Stommel, who's really the parent of the modern ungrading movement. And the blog post that this is from is titled "Grades Are Dehumanizing. Ungrading is no simple solution." And so what Jesse writes is that there is copious evidence that grades are not a good measure of learning, that they inhibit intrinsic motivation, and that they create a competitive environment between students and hostile relationships between students and teachers. So it's kind of not a very positive assessment. We can't entirely remove grades yet because they are hard coded into so many of our educational systems, but teachers can and should raise our collective eyebrows at grades. And we should do this work together with students. So, I am not against other people grading quite as much as Jesse Stommel is. I'll just tell you a little bit about why I chose to remove myself from the grading process, more or less, for some of the teaching that I've done over the last year. And I'll start with a little bit of my own personal background. So I grew up going to progressive schools. And so up until I went to college, for the most part, I didn't see grades myself. It was something that was outside of my experience. We worked on projects instead of tests, and we had evaluations at the ends of terms. And so my teacher would write some stuff about what I had done, and I would write some stuff about what my journey had been. And it was kind of understood in this teaching philosophy that not only are students too multidimensional and complicated to be distilled into a unidimensional, numeric or alphabetical scale, the learning that we do is much more complicated and multidimensional. And so, so concerns with distilling it down that way. And yet I am a college professor now, and as Jesse Stommel's blog notes, the system that we're in does require grades to be submitted in most schools. And so I've been grading for years and feeling awkward about it. And then over this last year, or the last couple of years, I've been sort of hearing ideas about this ungrading concept. And then I found out that my friend in math here at Williams College, Chad Topaz, he has been ungrading in some of his classes. And so I talked to him and I said, I'm just going to dive in. I said, this is the time. So I did it this past year in 2020, 2021. So this is actually not a pandemic talk I'm giving, similar to Tim and Toby. This happened at the same time as the pandemic, but was not brought on by the pandemic. The class that I will be talking to you about is an upper level elective called the Economics of Environmental Behavior. And the format of the class happened to be hybrid. I had mostly in-person students, but some remote students. There were 13 or 14 students, and all of them were juniors or seniors. And it's a senior seminar that operates like a graduate seminar. I teach at a liberal arts school, and so this is how our senior seminars tend to be. We read papers together and then discuss them, and then the students do replication exercises that are econometric. They present additional readings to the class, and then the big assignment is a term paper that is an original research project that is scaffolded with a series of assignments throughout the semester. I also did ungrading with some independent study students over the course of the year, and that worked even better than it worked with the elective, but I'm going to focus for this talk on the elective. So what did the process look like? Well, you know, as that Stommel quote mentioned, we are still in a system that requires grades. And so even though I'm personally uncomfortable with the idea of grades, at the end of the semester, the students did receive grades. And that was definitely a thing. And that's why I'm calling it, really, it's more like self-grading than ungrading. And there's still the sort of professorial hegemony, if you want to say it that way, which is that I still defined what are the assignments that are going to be done. And I still give a lot of feedback on the assignments. In fact, there is no reduction in grading time because I spent just as much time giving feedback on assignments as I would in any other semester. What's different, though, is that the students, they identified what they wanted to get out of the class. They identified their learning and their growth objectives. They evaluated themselves on those objectives. And then at the end of the semester, they proposed grades that they felt were most appropriate for themselves. And then I had the opportunity to accept those grades or overturn them. This was what I gave to students at the beginning of the semester, the sort of the nexus of the ungrading stuff and our learning management software to explain what we're doing. And some of my students, I should say, had done ungrading before in other classes, mostly not in STEM Plus classes. So some of the students had experience with ungrading, but I would say most did not. So at the beginning of the semester, the students set goals for themselves on the dimensions they want to make progress on. I provided some example areas and some example goals. And I also asked them to say, how are you going to assess your progress toward this goal? And I met with students in the first week of class to discuss their goals for a half an hour to an hour for each student. Then halfway through the semester, the students all checked in on their goals. They assessed how they were doing so far. And then they also had the opportunity to revise and tweak any of the goals that they had made or the methods of assessment that they had initially proposed. And then again, I met with them individually to talk about how they were doing. Then at the end of the semester, they did the final self-assessment. And that's where they fully applied their modes for evaluating their progress towards their own goals. And then at the end, they proposed their own grade and explained why they thought it was the grade that was most appropriate for them. So the first question I always get asked by my colleagues is, did they all give themselves A's? And the answer is no. Most of them gave themselves A's, but honestly, it's a higher level elective in a liberal arts school. Most of them would have gotten A's anyway. So 9 of the 13 students who finished the class proposed A's for themselves. But I would say maybe 1 or 2 of those would not have gotten A's in a normal semester. And so, you know, I looked at the grades that they proposed and I said, they felt that they met their goals and they explained really thoughtfully what their journeys were like. And so I was not inclined to overturn them. And there were non-A grades. In fact, the only grade change that I made was the student who proposed a B-. I thought that they were being overly harsh on themselves, so I bumped them up to a B. So there was no what I would perceive as damage in terms of the grade distribution, or very limited damage. On the plus side, I felt that the students were very engaged. They did amazing work. They were wonderful students, but students reported this sense of intellectual freedom. So here's a couple of quotes and reflections. One student said, "I think I did a very good job fulfilling the goals I laid out for myself." Admittedly, those were probably non-traditional goals, they said. Another student who thinks of themselves as a very high-performing student, they said that in their other classes, they always felt like they had to check boxes. They had to do this to get the A. They had to speak up in class just the right times and just the right way. And they felt like they could engage in a more thoughtful way this semester. And I thought that was wonderful. And another student, this really touched me, said, "This class has shown me that the different types of smarts are just that different." And so for me, that says to me that this really worked to achieve the goals I wanted it to. It had students engage with the learning process in a more complex and thoughtful way. I will do this again. Thank you, Gina. And I am looking forward to doing this again. I will do it in electives. My department, I think, would not be that pleased with me doing this in intermediate microeconomics, which is my core course that I teach. but I see no reason to continue doing this in other classes. And I think that the only major thing that I would change from the structure that I have, which I think balanced pretty well the work that I was putting in with the benefit that was coming out of it, was maybe providing a little more guidance to students on setting the goals at the outset, which they found kind of challenging. So with that, I will stop and thank you so much.